Alright, I'll now go over some grunging techniques. Basically, the best way that I found to grunge things is to get photos of pre-existing textures and use them in your photos by layering them with different blending modes. Now some people use grunge brushes or things like that, but for me, I've never really liked that way. I just like when I go to a cool place, or if I see like a cool texture on the wall, you know, with like some nice grime stains and things like that, I always take a picture and save it, and I can use that in different photos. So you'll see here I got kind of a grunge photo of just like textures that I've taken that have kind of accumulated over the years. I've also got a few stock textures that I bought that work well. I'm going to show you working with this texture here, which is just the wall of a paint booth. All I have to do is just rotate it and get my selection tool and select it all, and holding Control and Alt, I'm just going to drag it on top of the other photo here. Okay, you can go to Edit, Free Transform, and just kind of, if you want to play around, you know, setting it to the right spot, whatever you want to do, you can do that. Alright. And so basically what you have now is you have your first picture on the bottom layer, and then on a layer on top of it you have your grunge texture. Now, right now the texture is just solid, and the mistake a lot of people make is they just turn down the solidness of the image, which is the opacity here on this box, and you can get kind of varied results like that, but to me that doesn't look very great. So what you can do is on this top layer is you can actually change the way that this top image affects the bottom image, and these are called blending modes. So you can see the different effects just by kind of flipping through the different ones, and you can get some pretty cool effects with just playing around. And just you know, I don't use any rule of thumb as to what blending modes work good, because you know, different textures have different tonal ranges, and it depends also what image you're putting it on. But for me, usually good blending modes that work are either multiply, screen, overlay, soft light, hard light, or vivid light. And for this particular picture, I'm gonna say it's gonna be hard light. Looks the best. One thing I found here is that the colors of the texture are influencing the colors of my actual picture. You know, it turns out a little bit too green, which I don't really like. So I can treat this texture on top as an individual image, and I can go into things like hue saturation and just turn the saturation down, and then I'm gonna have just the texture with no color. You know, you can also manipulate the color a little bit. For me, I think I'm gonna turn the color a little bit orangey red, and then almost drop the saturation down, almost down to the bottom. And that's looking cool. Okay. One thing I don't like when I use textures is to have too much going on in the face, because you know, it makes whoever's in your picture makes their face kind of look all crackly, which can be a cool effect definitely for some things, but for something like this, I don't want to really do that. So I can get rid of it two ways. I can use my eraser brush here, the same way I've been doing for the whole video, and just kind of erase away the grunge. And this also kind of gives a cool effect, like she's really popping out of the photo, and that looks pretty cool. But also what you can do is, if that's a bit too much for you, is you can actually use the clone tool. And the clone tool, what it does is, if you hold Alt and click on a point, it'll duplicate that point where you click without Alt. So what you can do with this, instead of getting rid of zits and stuff, what people usually use it for, is that you can actually use it to kind of blur around the texture by just putting it on top of each other a bunch of times. So that way you still kind of have something on top of the image, but you don't have kind of the individual details. And I'm sure you could use the blur tool too, but clone tool is a little bit more effective, I found. So basically what I'm doing is I'm holding Alt, clicking, and just kind of duplicating around the texture and moving it around the page So if I got rid of this background image, this is what it looks like. So there's not as much detail where I clicked and cloned, but the still kind of gray cast stays. Yeah, no, that looks pretty good. I like a little bit on the feet just to kind of blend her in a little bit more. Like I see right here, kind of it's too black in here, and the texture isn't affecting it very much. So if I were to just dodge a little bit, I can bring a lot of that texture out. And the burn's going to do the opposite since it's on the hard light blending mode. And I just kind of play around and see what looks good. And let's say I really wanted to enhance an individual scratch. I could zoom in real close and get the dodge tool. Just kind of go over it a few times. And you'll see now that scratch is much more emphasized. Just going to show you another thing here. I got this here texture of a crack. So if I wanted to put this kind of on top of the image, I could just do the same thing and then drag it on top like this. Okay, and I could find a blending mode that works for it. That one looks pretty good. I can get rid of some of that color, even though I don't know. I kind of like the look of those yellow red tones, but just to show you, I can get rid of it like that. Okay, and I can do a curves adjustment. Maybe just reposition the crack, maybe like. Yeah, right there looks pretty cool. I can use the eraser brush to get rid of some of this, and I can use the eraser brush to get rid of some of the weird little edges that came along with that texture. And just to reinforce the crack, to make sure you see it really good, I can zoom in and use the burn tool. Just kind of go over the inside. And feel free to also dodge and burn on the background layer just by clicking on it, and you can kind of work in there as well. There, now that's pretty cool. And that is yours just to move around and put it wherever you want it to. So another thing when working with grunge to keep in mind, if a texture isn't working for a particular image but you really want to use it, there's ways to kind of manipulate it and to play around with it to make it fit. And I'll show you that with an example that I have here. Is that I've got this texture here which I found on the wall of an abandoned tire factory. But so I'm just going to select that, drag her on top. Okay, now I can try my usual blending modes. Darken's not going very good. Multiplying, nothing too great. But what I can do is that I know that hard light works a lot for grunge, and I mean that looks okay right there, but you know it's not great. And you see when I put it on hard light here, I'm not seeing kind of all the nice little details in this texture here, kind of like the stains and the scratches, because they're all dark. And because it's being placed on top of an already dark image, they're just being lost and you can't see them. So what you can do for that is kind of obvious, but it's a cool trick, is that first you can desaturate it so the color doesn't screw up your photo. And then instead of using this, you can actually invert your grunge layer that's on top, and you'll get a whole different set of options to use. So now, I know that looks a lot better than before, but of course I kind of lost some of the details on my picture below. So what I can do now is, on top of this grunge layer again, how I just inverted it, I can now do a curves or levels adjustment and kind of just bring in just the details of the grunge. I can make the whites pop just a little bit. Okay. And I can kind of further fine tune it, with levels, or I can up the contrast a little bit. So I can bring in just a little bit more detail. Okay. And I can do what I usually do and just go over the face with the eraser brush, because I'm not a fan of the grungy face look, although it can be freaky and cool on some photos, but not this one. But so now I can just show you the difference of what happened when we inverted it. It looks pretty cool now. We got some interesting white textures, but if I didn't invert it, I can put it back. It doesn't really look so great. I can't even see it. So that's just another little trick that you can do with grunge.